It started as curiosity, nothing more than late-night boredom mixed with the kind of reckless interest that pulls people into places they shouldn't go. The storyteller would later admit that if he had just closed the laptop when the page first loaded, none of it would have happened. But at the time, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt like exploring, like stepping into something hidden but harmless. It was the kind of thing people talk about but never actually experience, and that's what led him to the site. The link was buried deep inside a forum thread that didn't even look real, just random users posting fragments of URLs, warning each other. They warned not to click, not to visit, not to interact, which of course only made it more tempting because warnings like that pull people in. After a few minutes of hesitation, he copied the link, pasted it into his browser, and pressed enter, expecting nothing. Maybe a broken page, maybe a scam, but instead, the screen went black for a second before a single video window appeared. It was already playing. No buffering, no loading screen, just instant playback, and that alone felt wrong. Before he could think too much about it, the video became clearer, the image stabilizing into something that looked like a room. The camera was angled downward like a security feed, showing a small, empty space with plain walls and a single chair in the middle. There were no decorations, no windows, no clear door, just a contained, silent environment that didn't feel like a normal room. At first, he assumed it was just another creepy stream, staged content meant to look unsettling for reactions. But there were details that didn't add up. The lighting wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was dull, flat, almost clinical. The camera quality was grainy and distorted, like an old surveillance system rather than something meant for entertainment. He leaned closer to the screen without realizing it, his curiosity pulling him in as he scanned the image for movement. Nothing changed. The room stayed empty and completely still. After about 30 seconds, he almost clicked away. But then something shifted. Not in the center of the frame, but in the far corner, just a slight movement, barely noticeable. His eyes locked onto it instantly, his body going still as he tried to figure out what he had just seen. The shadow in that corner didn't look like a normal shadow anymore. It looked separate, like it had depth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it shifted again, stretching just enough to confirm that it was moving independently. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a loop. It was happening in real time, and he knew that instinctively. He looked for the viewer count. Streams always have viewers, even the smallest ones, but this one showed zero viewers. No chat, no usernames, nothing. Just him. Or at least that's what it said, and that didn't make sense. It made him feel like he wasn't supposed to be there, like he had accessed something not meant to be seen. The shadow in the corner pulled away from the wall, revealing a vague outline that resembled something human, but not quite right. Too tall, too thin, its proportions off in a way that made it difficult to focus on directly, like his eyes didn't want to lock onto it. He leaned even closer, his breathing slowing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Glitch? Visual trick? The longer he stared, the more defined it became, its edges sharpening slightly. Then it stopped moving entirely. It froze in place as if it had noticed something, as if it had become aware. The camera feed flickered, a quick glitch that distorted the image for a second, and when it stabilized, the thing was gone. His heart skipped as he leaned back. It hadn't moved out of frame or walked away, it just disappeared. Then the camera angle shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough to change the perspective as if adjusted manually. That shouldn't have been possible. He searched for signs of control, a live operator, anything, but there was nothing. The chair in the center of the room moved a slight scrape against the floor, confirming he wasn't just watching. Something was happening because he was watching. Then his phone buzzed on the desk, making him flinch. He looked back and the video had changed. The camera was showing a different angle, entirely lower, closer to the ground. On that wall was a faint reflection of a screen showing someone sitting at a desk, and he realized the reflection was him, subscribed to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. The moment he realized the reflection in the stream was showing him his room, his posture, the exact way he was leaning toward the screen, something inside him shifted. Curiosity turned into pure, unmistakable fear, because this wasn't delayed footage, it wasn't pre-recorded. It wasn't even slightly out of sync, it was perfect. Every movement he made mirrored instantly, like the camera in that other place was somehow watching him in real time. His first instinct was denial. Maybe his webcam was on. Maybe the site had accessed it. Maybe it was a trick, a loop, something staged to feel interactive. But the angle didn't match his webcam, the lighting didn't match his room, and worst of all, the version of him in that reflection wasn't just moving. It was slightly off, not enough to notice immediately, but enough to feel wrong, like it was copying him rather than being him. As he stared, frozen, his breathing shallow, the reflection tilted its head just a fraction of a second too late, a delayed mimicry that sent a cold wave through him. That meant it wasn't a live feed? It was something watching him and then recreating him. His fingers twitched over the keyboard, his instinct to close the tab overwhelming. But he hesitated. If he closed it, he wouldn't know what it was doing anymore. Wouldn't know if it was still there, still watching. That hesitation was enough. The stream reacted again, the camera angle shifting upward, no longer focused just on the reflection, but on the space behind it. And in that reflected version of his room, something else was there now, something faint, barely visible at first, standing just behind the chair. A shape too tall, too thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes snapped away from the stream and into his actual room, turning quickly to check. But there was nothing there, just the empty space, the wall, the quiet stillness. When he turned back to the screen, it was still there, clearer now. It was showing him something about his room, something he couldn't see directly, something that existed just out of sync with reality. The stream was acting like a window into that layer, where things didn't follow the same rules, where things could stand behind you without being seen. The thing's posture was unnatural, its limbs slightly too long, its head tilted, it felt controlled, aware. Then, the reflection version of him moved again. This time, he didn't move in real life. The copy lifted its hand slowly toward its face, even though his own hand remained still on the desk. Panic fully set in. He jerked back from the desk, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he created distance. But the stream didn't stop. It showed the reflected version of him now standing up from the chair, even though he was still sitting on the floor, his heart pounding violently. The thing in the reflection stepped closer, its form becoming clearer, more solid. Then the camera zoomed, focusing on the space between the copy and the entity. The two seemed to align, as if the thing was positioning itself directly behind the reflection, matching its shape, overlapping it. The copy stopped moving entirely, freezing mid-turn, and the entity behind it leaned forward, its face coming closer to where the reflection's head should be. He could feel it. It was looking at him, not the reflection, not the copy, but him, directly through the screen. His entire body tensed. He instinctively reached forward to close the tab, but before he could click, the screen flickered violently, lines of distortion tearing across the image. When it stabilized, the reflection of him was gone. The chair was empty, mirroring his own empty room, but the entity remained, standing in the center. It raised its arm, the movement smoother than before, more intentional, and pointed directly at the camera, directly at him. His speakers emitted a sharp burst of static, followed by a low, distorted voice, and then text appeared at the bottom of the stream. "You found IT?" His stomach dropped as another line appeared beneath it, slower this time, as if being typed in real time. "IT sees you now." His breathing became shallow, unable to look away, and then the final line appeared. "Don't look away." The entity moved again, its head tilting further, leaning closer to the camera. The image began to distort, the screen itself unable to contain it. It was a rule, and like all the rules he had already broken, the consequences were already starting. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. The words on the screen, "do" and "to look away," didn't feel like text anymore. They felt like pressure, like something pushing against his mind, forcing his eyes to stay locked onto the stream as the entity leaned closer to the camera, its form distorting the image around it. Like the screen itself was bending to accommodate it, he forgot how to breathe, his chest tightening as his body froze in place. Because now it wasn't just something he was watching, it was something approaching, something that had noticed him and was now closing the distance. His instinct to look away grew stronger, a deep, overwhelming urge to break eye contact. to shut the laptop, to turn off the power. But those words, "don't look away," echoed in his mind like a warning, and that hesitation, that inability to act, was all it needed. The stream changed again, the camera pushing closer toward the entity as its outline became clearer, revealing the unnatural angles of its limbs. Its face was still a shifting blur of shapes that refused to settle, as if his brain couldn't process it fully. The longer he stared, the more it resolved, detail by detail, like it was learning how to appear, sending a sharp wave of panic through him. Suddenly, the screen flickered, a prolonged distortion making the entire image ripple like liquid, the edges stretching outward as if pushing against the boundaries. His heart began to race as he gripped the desk, trying to stay anchored in reality while everything in front of him fell apart. Then the audio changed, a low, constant hum replacing the static, growing louder, vibrating through the speakers in a way that felt physical. Layered beneath it, a faint rhythm, almost like breathing. He realized the rhythm didn't match the video. It matched his own breathing. He instinctively held his breath, and the sound stopped instantly, in perfect sync, leaving only silence behind. Slowly, cautiously, he exhaled, and the sound returned, picking up exactly where it left off, matching him again. Then the screen cracked, not physically, but visually, a jagged line tearing across the image as if the video itself had split open. The entity moved toward that crack, its form slipping partially into it like it was navigating between layers. Then it reached out, its fingers stretching unnaturally as they pressed against the boundary of the video frame. The surface of the screen didn't behave like a screen anymore. It behaved like something thin, fragile, something that could be pierced slowly. Its fingers pushed through into his space, emerging from the screen itself, thin, elongated, wrong, casting a faint shadow on his desk that shouldn't have been possible. His mind shattered as he stared at it, unable to move. The fingers twitched slightly, testing the air like they were learning how to exist outside the screen. Then the rest of the arm followed, pushing through slowly, the distortion around it intensifying as more of its form crossed over. He stumbled backward, his chair tipping over as he put distance between himself and the desk, his eyes locked on the thing. The air grew colder, the light dimming as if something was absorbing it. Then his laptop screen went completely black. The sound came next, not from the device but from the room itself, a soft, deliberate movement behind him. Slowly, painfully slowly. He turned his head, just enough to see the edge of something tall and thin in his peripheral vision. He saw it fully, clearly, standing just a few feet away, its form no longer distorted by a screen, no longer limited by pixels. Its head tilted at that impossible angle, and its face was a shifting, incomplete shape that his mind refused to process. Then it moved, just a single step forward, slow, deliberate, the floor creaking softly beneath it. There were no more rules to protect him. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. The moment it took that step toward him, slow, deliberate, real, something inside him snapped into pure survival mode. Not the kind fueled by panic alone, but something deeper, more instinctive, the kind that doesn't think, doesn't question, just reacts. And before he even realized what he was doing, his body had already moved, stumbling backward across the room, his hands slamming against the wall. As he tried to keep his balance, his eyes locked on it for only a second longer before he forced himself to turn away completely. Because now he understood something with terrifying clarity. Looking at it had brought it here. Focusing on it had made it stronger, and whatever rules had existed before, they were gone, or worse, they had changed again, and he couldn't risk giving it anything more. Not another second of attention, not a moment of recognition. And so he ran, not in a controlled way, not carefully, but blindly, his footsteps heavy and uneven as he rushed out of his room and into the hallway, the sound echoing too loudly in the silence, every step feeling like it might trigger something behind him. Something following him, something matching his pace just out of sight. And he didn't look back, not even for a second, because the urge to check was overwhelming, almost painful, but he fought it, forcing his eyes forward as he reached the stairs and took them two at a time, nearly slipping in his haste, his hand gripping the railing tightly as he descended, his breathing ragged, his chest burning as adrenaline pushed him forward. And when he reached the bottom, he didn't stop. He went straight for the front door, his hand fumbling with the lock, twisting it quickly, pulling the door open and stepping outside into the early morning air. And for a moment, he felt relief, the cool air hitting his face, the open space around him, the quiet street stretching out in front of him, normal, unchanged, real. And he stepped further out, putting distance between himself and the house, his body still tense but beginning to slow, his breathing gradually evening out as the immediate panic started to fade. Because out here it felt different, safer, like whatever had been inside couldn't follow him, couldn't exist beyond those walls. And he turned back slightly, just enough to glance at the house, expecting to see something in the windows, some sign that it was still there. But everything looked normal, perfectly normal, the curtains still, the lights off, nothing out of place, and that normalcy began to settle him, just slightly, enough for him to take another step back, then another, creating more distance, convincing himself that he had gotten out in time. But that relief didn't last long, because as he turned to walk down the street, his phone buzzed in his hand, the sudden vibration making him flinch again, his eyes dropping instinctively to the screen, even though part of him screamed not to look. But he couldn't stop himself, not yet, not after everything that had happened. And when he saw the message, his entire body went cold, because it wasn't from any contact, wasn't from any app, just that same blank notification, the same empty space with text. You left. His breath caught as he read it, his fingers tightening around the phone. And before he could even process it, another message appeared, slower this time, almost like it was thinking, like it was choosing its words carefully. I didn't. And that was when the air around him shifted, not dramatically, but enough for him to feel it, a subtle drop in temperature, a faint heaviness pressing against his chest. And his instincts screamed at him to move, to run, to get as far away as possible. But his body hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for him to realize something far worse. It had never been tied to the house. The house had just been where it started, where it found him, and now it was with him, moving with him, following him, not through walls or doors, but through something deeper, something he couldn't escape by simply changing locations. And his breathing quickened again as he forced himself to walk faster, then faster still, turning the corner at the end of his street, putting distance between himself and the house, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with him, that subtle pressure, that awareness, like something just outside his vision was keeping pace, matching his movement step for step, and he resisted the urge to look, resisted the pull to check reflections in windows, resisted every instinct telling him to confirm what he already feared, because he knew that looking might be exactly what it wanted again. And so he kept moving, faster now, his footsteps echoing, his breath loud in his ears, his mind racing for somewhere to go, somewhere safe, somewhere that might break whatever connection this was. And eventually he reached a busier street, the presence of other people finally coming into view, a few cars passing, a couple of early pedestrians walking along the sidewalk, normal life continuing as if nothing had changed. And for a moment that grounded him, the normalcy of it all, the idea that he wasn't alone anymore, that whatever this was couldn't exist in plain sight, couldn't follow him into a public space without being noticed. And he slowed slightly, his breathing still uneven but more controlled now, his eyes scanning the area, taking in the movement, the noise, the reality of other people around him. And then his phone buzzed again, and this time he hesitated longer before looking, his hand tightening around it. His mind telling him not to, telling him to ignore it, but the curiosity, the need to understand, the fear of not knowing. It pulled him in again, and slowly, reluctantly, he lifted the phone and looked at the screen, and the message was already there, waiting for him. They can't see me. His stomach dropped as he read it, his eyes widening as he instinctively glanced around at the people nearby, at the cars passing, at the normal world continuing untouched. And then another message appeared immediately after, as if responding to his thoughts. Only you can. And the weight of those words hit him harder than anything before, because it confirmed what he had been afraid to fully accept. This wasn't something that existed in the same way as everything else. It wasn't bound by the same rules, the same visibility, the same reality. It existed with him, for him, through him, and that meant no matter where he went, it would be there, just out of sight. Always close, always watching, and the idea of that settled into his chest like a stone, heavy and inescapable, because there was no safe place left, no distance he could create, no crowd he could disappear into. And as he stood there on that busy street, surrounded by normal life that felt suddenly distant, unreal, his phone vibrated one last time. A final message appearing on the screen, simple, calm, almost reassuring in the worst possible way. Don't worry. I'll stay close. And for the first time since it began, he didn't look around. He didn't try to find it. He didn't try to confirm anything because deep down, he already knew. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. At first, he told himself it was just panic, that everything he was feeling, everything he thought he was noticing, was nothing more than his mind trying to cope with what had happened. Because that was easier to accept than the alternative, easier to believe that stress was distorting his perception rather than something actually changing the world around him. But that explanation didn't last long. Because the changes started small, subtle enough to question, but consistent enough to become impossible to ignore. And the first time he noticed it, he was standing at the edge of a crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change, surrounded by a few other people who seemed completely normal, completely unaware, and when the light turned green, they all stepped forward at the same time. Except one of them didn't move quite right, just a slight delay, less than a second, but enough to catch his attention, and his eyes locked onto that person instantly. His heart rate picking up as he watched them walk, their movements just slightly off, their posture just slightly unnatural, like a bad imitation of normal behavior. And he tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself it was nothing, but then he noticed it again, with someone else this time, and then another. Small inconsistencies, tiny breaks in timing, like the world around him was desensing, slipping out of alignment in ways no one else seemed to notice, and his breathing became uneven as he forced himself to keep moving, to blend in, to act normal. But the more he paid attention, the worse it got, the more things didn't line up the way they should, the more reality itself felt. Unstable, and then his phone buzzed again, the now familiar vibration sending a jolt through his body, and he froze for a moment, debating whether to look, whether to engage, whether to acknowledge it at all, because every time he did, it seemed to pull him deeper into whatever this was. But the silence after the buzz was worse than the message itself. The not knowing, the anticipation, and slowly, reluctantly, he lifted the phone and looked at the screen, and the message was already there, waiting for him. Do you see it? His stomach dropped as he read it, his eyes darting around instinctively, scanning the people, the buildings, the street itself, and that was when he noticed something he hadn't before: the shadows. They weren't lining up correctly, not all of them, some stretched too far, some not far enough, some moving slightly before or after the objects casting them, and his breath caught as he focused on one in particular, the shadow of a man standing a few feet away, because for a split second, it didn't match him at all. It was taller, thinner, its head tilted at that same unnatural angle, and when the man shifted, the shadow corrected itself instantly, snapping back into place like nothing had happened. But the damage was already done, the image burned into his mind, and his heart began to race uncontrollably as he took a step back, then another, his eyes wide as he realized the changes weren't random. They weren't mistakes or glitches in perception, they were intentional, controlled, precise, and the message on his phone updated again, another line appearing beneath the first. I can change things now. And the calmness of that statement hit him harder than anything else. Because it wasn't threatening, it wasn't aggressive, it was matter of fact, like a simple explanation of a new rule, and his mind struggled to process what that meant, how something like that could even be possible, but the evidence was right in front of him. In the shadows, in the movements, in the slight distortions that only he seemed to notice, and then something even worse happened. Because as he stood there, frozen in place, trying to make sense of it all, the world around him paused. Not completely, not like everything stopped, but like it slowed just enough to feel wrong. Like a video buffering, and for a split second, everyone around him seemed to freeze mid-step, mid-motion, their expressions locked in place, their bodies still, and then they resumed, continuing as if nothing had happened, as if the interruption had never occurred, and his breath hitched violently as he stumbled backward, his mind racing, his body shaking. Because that wasn't perception that was real, something had just interfered with the flow of reality itself. And the phone buzzed again, another message appearing instantly. Not everyone. His eyes snapped to the screen, confusion mixing with fear. And then the realization hit him. He hadn't paused, he had experienced it. He had felt the break, the shift, and that meant whatever this thing was, it was isolating him, separating him from everything else, putting him in a different layer of reality where it had control, and the thought alone made his chest tighten as panic surged through him again. Because if that was true, then nothing around him could be trusted anymore. Not the people, not the environment, not even time itself. And as if to confirm that fear, something changed right in front of him. The street he had just walked down wasn't the same anymore, the layout slightly different. The buildings positioned at slightly different angles, small details altered in ways that didn't make sense, and he turned quickly, his eyes scanning behind him, expecting to see the same path he had just taken. But it was gone, replaced by something similar but not identical, like a copy that had been adjusted, edited, rewritten, and his breathing became erratic as he spun back around. His mind struggling to keep up, to understand how he had moved, how he had gotten here, how anything made sense anymore, and then the message appeared again. A new line forming slowly on the screen. "You're in my version now." And the weight of those words crushed any remaining sense of control he had, because it meant this wasn't just influence. It was ownership. This thing wasn't just affecting reality, it was replacing it, rewriting it around him, shaping it into something else, something it controlled completely, and the world around him began to feel less solid, less reliable, like everything could shift at any moment, like nothing was fixed anymore. And his mind started to fracture under the pressure, thoughts overlapping, conflicting, his sense of direction collapsing as he tried to move, tried to escape, but every step felt uncertain, every turn felt wrong, and the more he moved, the more the environment seemed to adjust, subtly at first, then more noticeably, like it was guiding him somewhere, funneling him through a version of reality that it had created. And the worst part wasn't the changes themselves, it was the fact that he was starting to accept them, starting to adapt, starting to move through this altered space as if it was normal, and that realization terrified him more than anything else, because it meant he was losing his grip on what was real, losing his ability to distinguish between what should be and what was being forced on him. And his phone buzzed again, the final message appearing as he stood there, lost, disoriented, trapped in a world that no longer followed any rules. It's easier if you stop fighting, and for a moment, just a moment, he almost believed it. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.
It began with a flicker, not in the lights, but in the world itself. A subtle tremor in the fabric of what I called reality. The colors started to bleed, the concrete felt soft. Like wet ink on a page that hadn't dried yet, everything was becoming liquid. I stood in the center of a city I no longer recognized. The buildings weren't made of stone anymore, they were made of static. My hands were trembling. I could feel the hum of the electronics in my pocket, vibrating with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I reached for my phone, the only tether I had left to the world I knew, but the device felt heavy, pulsing like a heartbeat, when the screen came to life. It didn't show my wallpaper or my notifications. It showed a void, a deep, hungry blackness. And there, in the center of that digital nothingness, was someone else, or rather, it was me, but a version that wasn't alive. He didn't blink, he didn't breathe, he just stood there, staring back through the glass with eyes that saw everything and nothing. Behind him, the shadows began to move. They weren't just darkness, they were shapes tall, thin, and impossibly fragile. They stood like sentinels at the edge of the frame, their long limbs casting shadows that shouldn't exist in a digital space. Then words began to form. They didn't pop up, they bled into the screen like ink dropped into water. "You stayed," it said. I tried to look away. I tried to drop the phone. But my muscles felt like they were made of lead, anchored to the screen. Another line appeared. You kept watching. It felt like a confession, a realization that I had invited this in by never looking away. Then the double moved. It wasn't a human motion. It was jerky, like a skipping frame in a corrupted video file. As his head tilted, the world around me began to dim. The streetlights flickered out, replaced by a cold, digital gray. The air grew thin. The sounds of the city were replaced by a low, rhythmic hum that resonated in the back of my skull. One final message appeared on the glass, a promise, or maybe a warning. "Now they'll see you too. Suddenly, I wasn't the one looking anymore. I was the one being watched. The perspective shifted. And I was gone. A viewer count sat in the corner of my vision. 0. I was alone in a room that didn't exist, waiting for an audience. Somewhere out there, another hand is reaching for another screen. Another mind is about to dissolve into the dark.
At first, it doesn't feel like anything is wrong. It never does. Not in the beginning, because the page loads instantly, the video already playing. Without buffering, without delay, just appearing as if it had been waiting specifically for you, and you might notice that detail for a second. That strange lack of loading time, but you brush it off because everything online feels fast now, everything is instant. And your attention shifts to the video itself, to the room it shows, dimly lit, empty except for a single chair sitting perfectly still. The camera angle high in the corner like a security feed, grainy enough to feel real, not cinematic, not staged, just there. For a moment, you hesitate, your instinct telling you to close it, to leave, because something about it feels off in a way you can't explain. But curiosity wins, it always does, and you keep watching, leaning in slightly, your eyes scanning the corners of the frame, waiting for something to happen. Because something has to happen, right? There has to be a reason this exists, a reason someone shared the link, a reason you clicked it. And then you see it, not in the center, not where you expect, but in the far corner, just a slight movement, barely visible. Like a shadow adjusting itself, and you pause, your breath slowing, your focus sharpening. Because now you're paying attention, now you're invested. And the longer you stare, the clearer it becomes that shadow isn't fixed, it's not tied to anything in the room, it's separate, moving on its own, slowly pulling away from the wall, and something inside you shifts at that moment. Curiosity turning into unease, but not enough to stop. Because now you need to understand, need to see what it is, and your eyes flick briefly to the corner of the screen, to the viewer count. Expecting to see at least a few others, some confirmation that you're not alone in this, but it reads 0, completely still, unchanged. And for a second, that doesn't make sense, because you're watching it, you're right here, but the number doesn't move, doesn't update, as if you don't count, as if the site doesn't recognize you at all. And that thought lingers just long enough to make you uncomfortable. But the shadow moves again, more clearly this time, stretching slightly along the wall, taking on a shape that almost resembles something human. But not quite right, too tall, too thin, its proportions off in a way that makes it hard to focus on directly. Like your eyes keep slipping away from it without you meaning to, and yet you keep trying, keep staring. Because now it feels like it's responding to you, like the more attention you give it, the more defined it becomes. And that idea should scare you more than it does, but instead, it pulls you in further, and then the video flickers just once. A brief distortion that breaks your focus for a split second, and when it stabilizes again, the shadow is gone, completely gone. Leaving the room empty once more, and you feel something in your chest tighten slightly, not relief, but something closer to anticipation. Because now you're waiting for the next change, the next movement, the next sign that this isn't over, and you don't have to wait long. Because the camera shifts slightly, just enough to change the angle by a few degrees. And that shouldn't happen, not in a normal video. Not without someone controlling it, but there's no interface, no controls, nothing to suggest anyone is operating it, and yet it moves, and then you notice something new, something subtle but impossible to ignore once you see it, a reflection, faint and distorted. On the far wall, showing a screen with someone sitting in front of it, watching the video, and your breath catches, because that reflection. It looks familiar, too familiar, the posture, the angle, the way they're leaning slightly forward. And slowly, almost reluctantly, you realize what you're looking at, because the reflection isn't just similar to you. It is you. But not quite, not perfectly, the timing slightly off. The movement's just a fraction delayed, like it's copying you rather than mirroring you. And that's when the unease turns into something deeper, something colder, because now it's not just a video anymore. It's something interacting with you, something aware of you, and the longer you watch, the more it changes. The reflection version of you moving independently now, standing up even though you're still sitting, turning slowly as if responding to something. And you feel your heart rate start to rise as your eyes flick away from the screen, your instincts forcing you to check your real surroundings. to look behind you, to confirm that there's nothing there, and when you do, you see nothing, just your room, just the normal world. But when you turn back to the screen, it's still there, clearer now, standing behind the reflection of you. A tall, thin shape with its head tilted at that impossible angle, and this time it's not subtle, not hidden, it's fully visible. And it's looking directly at the camera, directly at you, and your chest tightens as you realize something you can't explain. It's not just on the screen. It's closer now, closer than it should be, closer than the distance between you and your monitor. And the text appears at the bottom of the video, simple, white, impossible to ignore. You found IT, and you feel a chill run through you as the next line forms beneath it. Slower this time. IT sees you now. And at this point, you know you should close it, you know you should stop, but you don't, because something inside you is telling you not to. That's when the final line appears, the one that matters more than anything else. Don't look away. But then the image shifts again. The figure leaning closer to the camera, its form distorting the screen around it. And that moment, that decision, is the one that matters, because that's when it begins. Not for him, but for you, because now you've seen it too. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.